So I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are standing backstage with a close friend.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and they are about to walk out and perform in this massive, super high-stakes competition.
Lots of pressure.
Exactly. And you really want to wish them good luck.
Mm-hmm.
So you look them dead in the eye with total sincerity, and you say, I hope you fracture a limb.
Right, which is just aggressive.
It is. And then, a little while later, you have to confess to someone else that you accidentally revealed a massive, highly sensitive secret. So you tell them, look, I'm really sorry I released a feline from a sack.
Natural.
And to top it all off, you look out the window at a heavy rainstorm, you sigh, and you complain that domestic pets are falling from the sky.
When you lay it all out like that, it sounds completely unhinged. I mean, if you translated those concepts literally to someone who was, just learning the language, they would genuinely think you were losing your grip on reality.
Oh, they think it was total madness.
Absolutely. It sounds like madness.
But to native speakers, you don't even blink when you hear those phrases. Like, they are completely normal, everyday shorthand. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. So welcome, everyone, to Dale English class. We are so incredibly glad you are here with us.
We really are.
Our mission for this session is to decode the bizarre, entirely hidden logic behind the weirdest English idioms. Because we are going to unpack the incredible histories that prove these seemingly nonsensical phrases actually make perfect, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious sense.
Yeah, once you know the secret history hiding right inside them, everything clicks.
Exactly.
And, the overarching theme here is that the English language is basically a living museum.
Oh, I love that comparison.
Right, because when you speak, you are casually using phrases every single day, often completely unaware that you are essentially speaking in ghosts. Like, we are carrying around the literal struggles of medieval peasants, the terror of 19th century soldiers, and the trickery of ancient merchants, and it's all just neatly disguised as polite conversation.
It's wild how we use language to sanitize the past, especially when you consider that some of those ghosts are incredibly dark.
Oh, very dark.
We constantly use these cute little euphemisms for minor inconveniences, right? Or just inevitable realities. But historically, they stem from some of the most violent or painful practices imaginable.
They really do.
Take the phrase, kick the bucket. Like, I always pictured someone literally tripping over a tin water pail. But knowing history, I'm sure the reality is far worse.
You'd be absolutely right to assume the worst there. Because today, you might casually say, your ancient laptop finally kicked the bucket.
Yeah, it has.
Or we use it as a slightly irreverent way to talk about someone passing away. But there are a few different historical paths for this. And the most prominent theory takes us straight into the visceral world of agriculture.
Okay.
Specifically, slaughterhouses in Norfolk, England.
Okay, so we're definitely not talking about a bucket of water.
Not at all. So when pigs were slaughtered, they were hung upside down by their hind legs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, from this heavy wooden beam just to let them drain. And that specific wooden yoke or beam was officially called a bucket.
Wait, the beam itself was called a bucket.
Yes. The word likely derives from the Old French term bouquet, which basically translates to balance.
Oh, okay.
If you visualize it, a slaughtered animal hanging from a raised wooden beam on a pulley system, it looks mechanically identical to a bucket being hoisted up from a stone water well.
Oh, I see. So the architecture of the slaughterhouse basically mimicked a well.
Yeah.
But where does the kicking part actually come in?
Well, as the animal was killed, its nervous system would react violently. It would spasm, and its hooves would physically strike the wooden beam it was suspended from.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it would, in its final moments, literally kick the bouquet.
That is incredibly vivid and deeply morbid.
It is.
But it also makes complete mechanical sense. Like, you could totally see how a slaughterhouse worker would just adopt that as slang for the moment of death.
Right. And that morbid slang wasn't isolated just to agriculture either. No, in the 18th century, there was a specific type of gallows used for public executions that utilized a very similar mechanism.
Wait, like hangings?
Exactly. Instead of the trapdoor we usually picture in movies, the condemned would stand on a precarious platform, and in the official records, that platform was referred to as a bucket.
You have got to be kidding me.
Nope. When it was time, the executioner knocked the support away, the bucket dropped out from under them, and the person hung.
So in that scenario, the bucket is violently kicked away from the person. Which actually that dovetails into that Roaring Twenties Chicago mobster legend I've heard rumblings about.
Oh, the concrete shoes
Let's
theory.
say it.
Yeah, the story goes that gangsters would punish informants by cementing their feet inside a heavy bucket.
Right.
Once that wet cement hardened, they would throw the victim into Lake Michigan. And as the person struggled and eventually drowned, they would physically kick the bucket attached to their feet.
It's just fascinating how all three of those scenarios, right? A French slaughterhouse beam, an 18th century gallows, and a Chicago mobster hit. They all share the exact same physical mechanism of struggling against a heavy object at the moment of death.
They do?
And today, you use that exact same phrase to describe a toaster that won't turn on.
It's a huge disconnect.
That is wild. But speaking of physical extremes, what about bite the bullet? Like today you might say, ugh, I just need to bite the bullet and do my taxes.
Right.
It just means doing something unpleasant you've been avoiding.
That phrase is a prime example of historical terror being watered down into, like, office jargon.
Totally.
Because biting the bullet originally meant displaying extraordinary, almost inhuman courage in the face of agonizing adversity.
So not just answering an email.
No, not at all. If we look at the military context back in the 1850s, armies, including the British and the Americans, they were equipped with a weapon called the Enfield rifle.
Okay.
And the ammunition for this rifle didn't come in a neat little brass casing like modern bullets.
Right.
It came in a fragile paper cartridge that contained both the explosive powder and the actual bullet.
Which means you couldn't just casually slide it into the chamber.
Exactly. You had to tear it open.
Yeah.
And in the absolute chaos of battle, with explosions deafening you, smoke everywhere, enemies charging your position, a soldier had to hold his heavy rifle, grab the paper cartridge, and literally bite off the head of it with his teeth to expose the explosive powder.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. You'd get the taste of raw gunpowder in your mouth, and if you hesitated or dropped it, it could cost you your life. You needed the sheer nerve to stand your ground and physically bite the bullet.
That requires so much composure. But doesn't this also tie heavily into 19th century medicine? Because, I mean, before anesthesia was widely available, battlefield surgeons were dealing with fully conscious patients.
Oh, the medical history is arguably even more gruesome.
I figured.
Surgeons performing amputations or extracting shrapnel had absolutely nothing to offer for the pain except maybe some whiskey and a piece of soft metal.
That's a piece of metal.
Yeah, to keep the patient from screaming or biting through their own tongue or literally shattering their teeth from the sheer blinding agony of the saw, the surgeon would hand them a soft lead bullet to clench in their jaws. You physically bit into the lead to endure the pain.
Think about the disproportion there.
It's massive.
We say we have to bite the bullet when we finally reply to, like, an annoying email from Human Resources. I mean, you're sitting in a comfortable Herman Miller chair sipping a vanilla latte, but your language is referencing unanesthetized amputations and musket fire.
It's definitely a coping mechanism. We borrow the ultimate human sufferings just to make our daily chores feel a bit more epic.
It's a total inflation of our own minor struggles, for sure.
Absolutely.
Which is actually a perfect segue, because it's not just about bodily harm. Humanity also uses language to try and manipulate fate itself, especially when people are feeling terrified or vulnerable.
That's very true.
This brings us to the incredibly paranoid world of the stage, and those strange superstitions we touched on in the intro.
The theater is full of them.
So why on earth do we tell actors to break a leg?
Well, this dips into the very bizarre human reliance on reverse psychology. Performers throughout history have operated under this core belief that wishing someone good luck is actually a massive, unforgivable jinx.
A jinx.
Yeah, the logic dictates that the spirits of fate, or the universe, or whatever you want to call it, are inherently punitive. So if you arrogantly assume you'll have good luck, the universe will punish your hubris with a disaster.
But think about the arrogance of that assumption. We assume the universe is just sitting there waiting to strike down anyone who feels confident. So we try to outsmart it by lying. We think, oh, if I pretend I want something terrible to happen, the cosmos will get confused and just let me succeed.
It's all about control, really. In situations where humans have zero control, like live theater with 1,000 variables, or a high-stakes athletic event, creating a linguistic ritual just gives the illusion of safety.
That makes sense.
For example, if you look at horse racing back in the 1920s, it was observed that you would never, ever wish a jockey good luck. That was practically a death sentence for their race.
Wow.
Instead, you'd look at them before they rode out and say, I hope your horse breaks a leg.
Which is so utterly dark. Imagine telling an Olympic sprinter you hope they snap their femur just to appease some petty spirits of fate.
Right.
But in the theater, that wish for injury actually had a literal malicious truth to it, didn't it?
It absolutely did. By the 1930s, there are accounts detailing how this superstition played out among understudies.
Ah, the understudies.
Yes, you had these incredibly ambitious understudies sitting in the dark, dusty wings backstage, literally whispering to themselves, I hope the principal actors break their legs.
Because that was the only way they were ever going to get on stage. If the lead goes down, the understudy becomes a star. So that dark, literal wish for an injury eventually morphed into a general idiom for a successful show.
Exactly.
But the mechanics of the stage itself also played a huge role here, especially during the vaudeville era, right?
Yeah. Oh, the vaudeville theory is wonderfully practical. So, on traditional Renaissance and vaudeville stages, the heavy side curtains that masked the backstage area from the audience, those were technically called legs.
The curtains were legs. Okay.
And in the ruthless world of vaudeville, producers would constantly overbook performers for a single night. You could wait backstage for hours, and you only got paid if you actually made it out in front of the crowd.
So your entire goal was to physically push past those side curtains.
Yes, to break a leg meant to break the visual line of those curtain legs. It meant you successfully walked onto the stage, performed your act, and most importantly, secured your paycheck for the night.
So I hope you break a leg literally just meant I hope you actually get paid tonight.
Pretty much.
That makes so much more sense to me than just arbitrary reverse psychology. Though, there's also the legendary story of David Garrick, the 18th century British actor.
Oh, a classic theater legend.
Yeah, he's performed as Richard III, and he was supposedly so intensely engrossed in the character that he fractured his actual leg on stage and didn't even notice until the curtain fell.
His adrenaline just masked the pain completely, which led people to use the phrase to mean, I hope you give a performance as legendary and transcendent as David Garrick's.
That's amazing.
And other disciplines do the exact same thing to ward off nerves. Like ballet dancers, right before they leap into the spotlight, will look at each other and mutter, merde.
Which is French for, well, excrement.
Yeah.
They just yell a profanity at each other.
Exactly. It completely disarms the tension. And opera singers have their own intricate version. They say, toi, toi, toi.
Toi, toi.
Yeah, which actually derives from the German word for the devil, Teufel, and they say it while pretending to spit on the floor 3 times, actively warding off the devil by invoking his name.
It's all about tricking the void. Okay, staying in the theater for one more. What about stealing someone's thunder? Today, you say that when a coworker takes credit for your brilliant idea in a meeting,
This is perhaps one of the most literal idioms we possess, and it traces back to the Enlightenment era. There was a rather unsuccessful playwright named John Dennis.
okay,
He wrote a play that was an absolute unmitigated flop. The critics despised it, the audience stopped coming, and the theater shuttered the production almost immediately.
a total disaster for his writing career.
But John Dennis had an engineering mind. For this production, he had invented a completely new mechanical method for creating the terrifying booming sound of thunder.
Oh.
He used metal sheets and heavy bowling balls. It was an absolute revolution for stage production.
Okay, I see where this is going.
A little while later, that very same theater mounted a production of Shakespeare's Macbeth. Dennis, curious, went to see it. And right during the famous witches scene, a massive storm sound rolled through the auditorium. He recognized it instantly. It was his exact, patented sound effect.
Oh, the ultimate betrayal.
Yeah.
They scrapped his play but kept his machine.
He stood up right in the middle of the crowded audience, absolutely furious, and allegedly screamed at the top of his lungs, "They will not let my play run, but they steal my thunder."
He literally meant his thunder. That is incredible. I mean, he might have been a terrible writer, but he inadvertently coined one of the most iconic phrases in the English language.
He cemented his legacy just entirely by accident.
So the theater was clearly built on illusion and stealing ideas. But honestly, if you look at the history of everyday commerce, the marketplace was just as theatrical.
Oh, absolutely.
It was entirely about deception. Which brings us to the marketplace, scams, and medieval laws. Let's look at let the cat out of the bag and spill the beans. Because both phrases essentially mean revealing a secret.
The cat in the bag is a fascinating look at the chaotic mechanics of historical agricultural markets.
Yep.
Livestock was a massive investment for a regular person. A healthy piglet was incredibly valuable, but scammers thrived in those environments.
Of course they did.
A dishonest merchant would take your hard-earned money for a piglet, But instead of putting the animal in a burlap sack for you to carry home, they would utilize sleight of hand. They would quickly shove a feral, worthless street cat into the bag, tie it shut tight, and hand it to you.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back on this.
Go ahead.
If you are a buyer, how do you not notice you're holding a squirming, scratching, meowing cat instead of a piglet?
Yeah.
Like, were shoppers just incredibly gullible back then?
It sounds like the 18th century equivalent of an online shopping scam where you order a luxury winter coat and receive a tiny sweater meant for a doll.
That is a great analogy, but you have to picture the sensory overload of a 17th century market.
Okay, set the scene.
It's muddy, it's deafeningly loud with people shouting and animals squealing everywhere, and you are rushing to get your goods before dark. The merchant hands you a heavy, squirming sack. You assume it's your pig, and you leave.
Right.
It isn't until you walk all the way home to the quiet of your kitchen and untie the knot that you literally let the cat out of the bag. The secret of the scam is instantly laid bare. The moment of horrifying realization. Now, spilling the beans has a slightly more democratic origin, doesn't it? It's not about a scam, but about preserving secrecy in ancient Greece.
Yes, the Greeks utilized a highly physical secret ballot system for voting on important matters. Instead of paper, which was expensive and easily manipulated, they used beans.
Beans?
Every citizen was given a white bean to vote yes and a black bean to vote no. They would walk up and drop their chosen bean into a large, opaque clay jar so no one could see the running tally.
The original blind voting system.
Exactly. But if a clumsy citizen accidentally knocked that clay jar over, they would literally spill the beans.
Oh.
The entire secret vote would be scattered across the stone floor for everyone to see, ruining the anonymity of the democratic process. The secret was permanently out.
The physical mechanics of these phrases are just brilliant. Okay, what about by hook or by crook? Today you say you'll get a project done by hook or by crook, meaning by any means necessary, whether it's fair or slightly rule-bending.
This one reveals a huge amount about class structures and survival in medieval Britain. We have written records of this phrase dating all the way back to the 1300s.
Wow, that old.
Yeah. During this period, the massive, sprawling forests of England were not public land. They were exclusively owned by the royalty and the nobility.
Which meant strict trespassing laws.
Far worse than just trespassing. Chopping down a living tree for firewood was a severe criminal offense for a commoner.
Oh, wow.
But the peasants obviously needed fuel to heat their homes and cook their food to survive the brutal freezing winters. The nobility, not wanting a full-scale revolt, allowed a legal loophole.
Okay, what was it?
The poor were strictly forbidden from using axes or saws. However, they were legally permitted to gather any dead timber that had already fallen to the ground, or to pull down dead branches from the trees. But they could only use two specific non-lethal farming tools to do it.
A hook and a crook.
Exactly. The hook was a short, curved blade on a stick used for slashing low brush, and the shepherd's crook was a long wooden staff with a curved end used to hook high branches. Right.
So the peasants managed to survive the deadly winters by hook or by crook. They used whatever limited, arbitrary means the oppressive law allowed them to achieve their goal.
That is a masterclass in resilience. It's just a testament to surviving under an oppressive regime.
Speaking of blatantly bending the rules to survive, what about turning a blind eye? Meaning to purposefully ignore something you know is wrong or inconvenient.
This is one of the most audacious origins we have. It stems directly from the legendary British naval commander, Admiral Horatio Nelson.
Okay, Nelson.
Nelson was a brilliant tactician, but he had actually lost the sight in his right eye during a previous battle.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. In 1801, during the incredibly fierce Battle of Copenhagen, Nelson's fleet was struggling against heavy fire. His commanding officer, who was stationed miles away on another ship, raised a specific configuration of flags.
Because flags were the only way ships could communicate across the water back then.
Exactly. And those specific signal flags clearly ordered Nelson to cease the attack and retreat immediately. Nelson's officers saw the flags and anxiously informed him of the order.
Right, you can't ignore an order like that.
But Nelson firmly believed that if they kept the pressure on, they would break the enemy line and win. So, in a moment of pure theatrical defiance, he dramatically lifted his long telescope, placed it directly over his blind, useless eye, and pointed it toward the commanding ship.
Oh, that is magnificent. It's literally the 19th century equivalent of leaving your boss on red and claiming your phone died.
Exactly. He lowered the telescope and calmly announced to his frantic crew, "I have a right to be blind sometimes. I really do not see the signal."
Wow.
He completely ignored the order, pressed the attack, and actually won a decisive victory. He literally turned a blind eye to an order he simply didn't want to follow.
The sheer confidence of that man. We've got human deception and audacity down to a science, but humanity has always been at the mercy of things completely out of our control, like the elements, the weather, and time.
That's very true.
Which brings us to our final group of phrases. Let's step outside.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean when you look out the window and say it's raining cats and dogs? Because, honestly, as a descriptive tool, it's terrible.
It is a profoundly weird and unsettling image. There are records of this phrase in poetry from the 1600s, but the imagery stretches much further back, intertwining mythology with a very grim urban reality.
Okay, mythology first.
The first thread is Norse mythology, where storms were often depicted utilizing animal imagery. Dogs and wolves were closely associated with howling wind, while cats were associated with heavy, driving rain.
Okay, so a storm combining wind and rain is a storm of cats and dogs. I can appreciate the poetic symbolism there, but I have a creeping suspicion there's a much grosser physical reality to this.
Your suspicion is entirely correct. If you look at 17th century European cities, the streets were notoriously filthy.
Right.
There were no modern drainage systems, and the alleyways were packed with stray animals. When a massive torrential downpour occurred, those narrow streets would instantly flood with fast-moving, dangerous water. Tragically, many dead stray cats and dogs would be swept up in the floodwaters and carried rapidly down the streets. So after a heavy storm passed, you would step outside your door and see cats and dogs literally washed up everywhere.
Yeah.
To a casual observer, it genuinely looked as though it had rained animals from the sky.
That is just deeply sad and viscerally disgusting. Next time you complain about a puddle, think of that. And you're right, it's the perfect example of how an idiom completely detaches from its horrific reality over time and becomes just a pure symbol.
It really is.
Just like barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah.
You use it to tell someone they're making an error in judgment or blaming the wrong person for a mistake.
That one takes us straight into the dark woods of early American hunting. Specifically, it involves hunting prey like raccoons at night with packs of highly trained hound dogs.
Because raccoons will always scramble up a tree trunk to escape a predator.
They will. And the hounds, who had to rely entirely on their sense of smell in the pitch black, would track the scent, gather around the base of the trunk, and bark furiously into the branches to alert the hunters that the prey was cornered.
Right. But raccoons are incredibly intelligent and agile.
They are.
Let me guess. The raccoon jumps to another branch.
Exactly. The prey would quietly leap across the high branches to an entirely different adjacent tree, leaving their strong scent lingering on the bark of the original trunk. The dogs' noses would betray them. They would stay right there, furiously barking up a tree that was completely empty while the raccoon escaped. They were literally barking up the wrong tree.
So when I confidently accuse my roommate of eating my leftover pizza, and it turns out I ate it myself at 2 a.m. and forgot, I am the hound dog screaming at an empty branch.
That is a painfully accurate, if slightly embarrassing analogy.
Listen, it happens. Let's do one more, focusing on how we perceive time. Once in a blue moon. You use it to describe something that happens very rarely, like, I actually deep clean my oven once in a blue moon. But wait, the moon doesn't actually turn the color blue, does it?
No, a blue moon has absolutely nothing to do with the physical color of the lunar surface.
Okay.
Astronomically speaking, a blue moon simply refers to the appearance of a second full moon within a single calendar month. Because the lunar cycle is roughly 29.5 days, it's quite rare to squeeze 2 full moons into one 30 or 31-day month. It only mathematically happens every 2 or 3 years.
So if it's not a color, where does the actual word blue come from?
This is where linguistic corruption meets religious history. The word blue here is actually a corruption of the Old English word belue.
Belue, what does that mean?
Belue meant to betray.
Wait, a betrayer moon?
Exactly. And here's the mechanical reason why. The rigorous religious fasting season of Lent is strictly determined by the lunar calendar. It happens in the spring. If an extra unexpected full moon appeared in the spring season, it threw the entire ecclesiastical calendar completely out of whack. It forced the monks, the clergy, and the peasants to extend their difficult fasting period for an entire extra month.
Oh, peasants must have been absolutely furious. You're starving, waiting for the fast to end, and the sky tells you to wait another 4 weeks.
They felt utterly betrayed by the sky. The blue moon tricked them into weeks of extra suffering.
Wow.
Over the centuries, The pronunciation of blue shifted to sound exactly like the color blue, and the phrase evolved from a specific religious betrayal to simply mean any rare, unusual event.
When you look back at all of this, from the terrifying mechanics of the executioner's bucket to the betrayer moon, from the stolen thunder machine to Admiral Nelson's audacious blind eye, it perfectly proves your point. The English language isn't just a tool for communication. It is a living museum.
It truly is. Every single time you open your mouth to speak, you are unconsciously carrying forward the desperate survival tactics of medieval peasants dodging the law, the terror of battlefield surgeons lacking anesthesia, and the paranoid superstitions of Broadway understudies sitting in the dark.
It's incredible.
We encode the most extreme moments of human history into our idle, everyday chit-chat.
It really makes you wonder. The next time you casually use an everyday idiom, I want you to stop for a second and deeply consider what literal physical action you are actually describing.
Exactly.
You might think you're just complaining about a frustrating meeting at work, but you might be casually referencing an ancient naval battle or a clever marketplace scam involving a feral cat. What other secret forgotten histories are hiding right there in the very words you are using today, just waiting to be uncovered?
The language we use is never just words. It's an ongoing archaeological dig.
It really is. Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion today. We want to thank you so incredibly much for joining us here at Dale English Class. If you want to keep exploring the weird, dark, and wonderful history of language with us, please interact in the comments below. Tell us which phrase's origin blew your mind the most today.
And please don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends who love language, and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating English lessons just like this one.
Until next time, stay curious, watch out for those falling cats and dogs, and try not to break a leg out there.